Okay, so here I have an assortment of flies out. So we'll do this as mayfly, caddisfly, stonefly. Um, then we have to think about streamers. We have our nymphs, and I want to talk about terrestrials as well. The one midge that I would be sure and have in my box. Now, a lot of people don't like fishing midge patterns. Some of it's because of the time of year that you would fish them. They're not. They're not. They're not a fly that you're going to. Or not a fly you're going to use a lot. But you should have one. And if you do, it would be a zebra midge. Now, a midge is nothing more than a head with a wrapped body. I mean, they're so simple to tie. They're fast. I tie some with red bodies, some with green bodies, just to have. So I'm going to mention midges. Okay, so now let's move on to streamers. There are two streamers that everyone should carry. Now again, other than the Clouser minnow, the Clouser minnow is just that. It's a Clouser minnow. And, you know, I'm sorry, but it actually looks more like this one. It has a silver body on it. And I thought I had one. I'm sorry, I do not. But, so a Clouser minnow. But the go-to streamer would be your woolly buggers. Now, woolly buggers are heavy flies. They're big flies, and there's we talked the other day about what size tippet you would use for a streamer, and when we cast, we'll talk about casting them. So these are flies that represent swimming fish, sculpins, that type of thing. Once again, get them in do them in various colors. I do some in various sizes. They're not a hard fly to tie. They're not a fly that you drift on the top. They're a fly that you strip underwater. But like nymphs, they're a subsurface fly to use. Now, typically what happens is when trout get to be a certain size, then small little bugs aren't necessarily good enough for them, and it's when fish get to be a really good size that they start really looking for big chunks of food, and that's when they'll chase this. Not that a small fish won't, and I like streamer fishing. The best days I've ever had on the Green River below Fontenelle were not with any of these flies. They were with streamers, and in the fall, streamer fishing over there is great. The one other that I would mention that I like is the muddler minnow, and that's this one. So again, woolly buggers, weighted woolly buggers, again, tied in all sorts of different configurations and sizes. So that would cover the streamers. One of my favorite times of the year is August, early September. We have one more category of flies we should talk about, and that's called terrestrials. And around here, the terrestrial that is the most fun is hopper season. And you'll know that they're around because you see them start jumping around in all the fields. But usually what happens with terrestrials is they're not a fly that starts out in the water. They're a fly that will be in the bushes or in the weeds, and then the wind will blow them into the water. But when it comes to dry fly fishing and a trout hitting a hopper, that's when you can really get hooked on dry fly fishing, because that's really something. Speaking of that, going back to some of these other flies, Yeah, the other way you'll get an idea of a nymph and an emerger is when you see the way the fish rises in the water. If they're just slurping and they're not causing any kind of any commotion on the surface, or if they're just slurping, then they might be slurping emergers. But during hopper season, when they come after these hoppers, and there's so many different variations of hoppers. This particular one here happens to be my favorite. I've had the most luck with this hopper. They're tied in so many different ways. Foam-bodied hoppers, like this is a foam-bodied hopper with a post on it. The post on these, by the way, is just for you, so that you can see them floating. The other terrestrial that guides and people talk a lot about around here is a Chernobyl ant, which is this guy right here. And I would have to say that an honorable mention fly would be terrestrial, would be this guy here, a beetle. That's a pretty good one actually right there, when other things are not working. But hoppers are something. Now when I was tying knots and I was talking about a hopper and a dropper, that's this guy right here, and a dropper, and off of there I'm going to tie one of these nymphs off like so. And in that case, sometimes they take the hopper, and sometimes if they take the nymph, then the hopper becomes a strike indicator, which we'll talk about that at some other point. So, that's the, those are basic flies. If everyone had that kind of an assortment of flies without getting into all kinds of other crazy ones, you'd be good to go almost anywhere. And the ones that I mentioned will have you covered. That being said, there are probably a few other attractor types. They've done studies, and if you notice, so this is called peacock, that color. You'll notice that in the Royal Coachman, that's peacock. You'll notice that, and I love this fly right here. So this is a stimulator with a royal body. In other words, when it says royal, it's got to have the peacock in it. They've done studies about that. There's something about peacock in the water that just attracts fish. Now, this guy right here, I would not leave without for so many reasons. I don't know that I can explain it or understand it myself all the way, but this is called a double renegade because of the hackles. It's not a complicated fly to tie. I tie a lot of these in different colors. You can tie double renegades, which just have the two like so, single renegades on a smaller hook. Now, the interesting thing about this fly is fish are attracted to it if it's floating as a dry. But if you were to look at a woolly worm, cover all of this up, that would look like a woolly worm. So there have been many situations where I've had this fly on, and you might get a strike on the fly while it's floating on top, but the best part of this fly is actually when it sinks. So if you let your line loop around at the end and this fly starts to sink, sometimes right then and there a fish may have been falling, but the minute that it sinks, fish will strike it. If nothing happens at the end of the turn, then you fish it more like a woolly bugger or in a streamer and strip it back to you. Unlike some of these other flies where you pick them up and cast them again, fish this fly all the way. But it's one attractor that I would not leave home without. And while we're at it, I might as well mention, I said midges were the easiest thing to tie, but maybe that San Juan red worm is the easiest thing to tie. It's literally thread with some wraps on it. they're a good thing to have, and you should probably have some. You could tie this under your hopper as a dropper, so you look something like so. But well, again, that's probably something that you'll want to have. And other than that, I could spend time with you independently, and we could talk about other kinds of flies and variations of these flies. But I think if you stick with this group that I've talked about, and again, vary your size, and with stimulators, certainly vary your color. I mean, I have so many stimulators. Different colored heads, different colored bodies, different wing cases. I love that fly. This is without a doubt, for me anyway, of all the flies on here, these stimulators, you can see I have a box full of them. I have more of them waiting to go into the box, but that is my favorite dry fly. That being said, I've had some great days on an Adams. If I had to pick 2 dry flies to use, these would be the 2 right here. I would fish this stimulator, which is my caddis, and I would fish this Adams, which is my mayfly. One other thing I want to point out about, even though you may not have a hatch of stoneflies going on, don't be afraid sometimes if you're in big water, like if you're over on the snake. Don't be afraid to throw one of these big guys out. You'd be surprised at the action that you could create from that. And again, I just want to stress, you're going to want, if you're going to be a good fisherman, everybody wants to dry fly fish, and it's so much fun, it really is. But learn how to nymph fish. Nymph fishing, when all else fails and there's nothing happening on the water, there are nymphs in the water, and you will catch fish nymphing. It's not the same, it's a different cast, it's not all this real pretty loops and all that stuff. But if somebody wanted to make me a bet about catching fish, I'd have to just walk out on the stream with nymphs, and I'd feel really good about that. So I think we've covered all there is about flies. If you'd like to talk more about it, you can contact me, and we can do that. Thank you.